Hey everybody, this is Mrs. Wolfie from our Half Acre Homestead. Now, a lot of us have been watching those shows on the BBC called Victorian Farm, Edwardian Farm, Wartime Farm. Well, I've been watching them all, but I've been watching the Victorian series. What I saw Ruth Goodman make on the Victorian Farm was something called a Shropshire Fidget Pie. And that's what we're going to make today. Now let's start with the filling. Now I've looked up the filling and there are a lot of different recipes. There are as many recipes for fidget pie as there is for people who make borscht. So what we're going to do is I'm going to follow as closely as possible to the Victorian Farm show's recipe as possible. So for that, you're going to need 2 potatoes, and these were fresh dug out of my sack yesterday that I grew them in. You're going to need 2 onions, an apple, and I've got a nice Gala red apple here. You're going to need apple cider. Now I looked everywhere for apple cider and all I could find was apple juice. So you're going to need a bit of apple juice or cider and a bit of meat stock or soup stock and a pound of bacon. Now, our bacon and the bacon in Britain is different. I'm using mine because it's my home smoked bacon. But they call for something called, I believe it's called gammon. But anyway, what you could replace that with is ham, folks. Just diced ham. Okay, so we're going to cut up our 2 potatoes. Oh, and you're going to need some sage, some salt, and some pepper. Now let's do our apple. Now normally, the thought of putting fruit into a meat pie would disturb me. But pork and apple traditionally go together. Now the difference about this pie is that we're not going to use a pie tin. We're going to make the pie crust stand up on its own on a cookie sheet. Because apparently, traditionally, pie plates didn't come out until the middle, 1800s. Before that, pies had to basically stand up in the oven on their own. We got our nice chunks of apple and potato. Let's get on the onions. We're going to add our homemade bacon. And pop that in there. There we go. My sage didn't do well in the garden this year because of the drought, so we're going to find a lot of food prices going up because of the drought, folks. We don't need too much of the sage, just a taste. You can use dried if you want. If you're using dried, I'd use about a ½ teaspoon in there with about a ½ cup of our meat stock and about a ½ cup of apple juice or apple cider. Some pepper. And about a ½ teaspoon of salt. You don't need a lot because you've got bacon in there. Now we're going to put this on the stove and bring it up to a boil and then turn it right down to minimum. And when we get this on the stove, we'll be back to the pastry. Now we're going to make the pastry. And why do I have a pot, you wonder? Well, because our pastry is going to be hot water pastry. And what we're going to need for that is 3/4 of a cup of water, a ½ pound of lard. We're just going to melt this together And I have a bowl at the table of 5.5 to 6 cups of flour. And this is basically our pastry. All right, I'll see you back at the table. The reason we're making hot water pastry is because this needs to be tough. The pastry needs to be tough because it's going to stand up on its own. 5.5 to 6 cups flour, 2 cups of hot water, and 1/2 pound of lard. And it doesn't hurt. It really does not hurt to knead this. Now I'm going to get some flour and I'm going to put it on my cookie sheet and we're going to form our crust. This is my flour tin. It's a repurposed bouillon tin from a restaurant. Alright. Okay, this is actually quite hot. So once it's formed, I think I'll pop it in the fridge or the freezer to kind of set up. Alright, now we are going to make, oh, I have to save some for the lid, don't I? Maybe I should have made more. Well, we'll see. We're going to form the crust. Now this is quite hot, so I want to let it cool and hopefully it will set nicely. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cheat. I'm going to take my parchment paper and I'm going to roll it up and I am going to wrap my crust, around my crust and pull it together. I'm going to put a paper clip on it. That works. Yes, it's cheating. But you know what? It will make a nicer shape, won't it? Let's just pop this in the freezer or in the fridge even to cool down. All right? In the meantime, we'll roll out our crust. A crust. Now we don't want the crust too thin and we don't want it too big. We just want it to fit just inside or just on the top of our fidget pie. Set it aside until our dough is chilled. All right, we'll be back when I've cleaned up my mess and we're ready to put it in the oven. All right, now since we're going to have a pie in the oven for supper, I got this wonderful buttercup squash at the grocery store. My buttercup squash did not come up this year. I've got a couple of sweet potatoes that were kind of wilting in the fridge. So we're going to grate these up and start filling. Now I've hollowed out my buttercup squash just like you would a Halloween pumpkin. And we're just going to start filling it with shredded, grated sweet potato. It's a lovely combination. We'll be back when I have this all together. Alrighty, we now have our squash filled with, I'm going to say 2 medium sweet potatoes, and you can see this is a fair size buttercup squash. So we've grated our sweet potato. We are going to add, of course, I'm going to say about a heaping tablespoon, maybe 2. Yeah, let's say 2. Of brown sugar, grated black pepper, but a 1/2 teaspoon of coarse pickling salt. Now we're going to put about a tablespoon of butter on top. See this? We were talking about repurposing. This is one of those little decorative tiny teapots, but it has no lid, so we use it as a toothpick holder. And we're going to take our lid and we're going to insert a couple of toothpicks just into the lid. And the toothpicks will just stop this from falling inside as it shrinks. And we're going to cover this with a sheet of tin foil, and this is going to go in the oven with our fidget pie. Alrighty. Our oven is preheating to 400 degrees. And it's only going to be 400 degrees for the first 15 minutes while our pastry cooks to form the bowl. Now here's hoping, folks. I have never done this before, so I really don't want to post my very first epic fail video. So now this parchment seems to have done admirably. Lovely, lovely, lovely. I'm quite pleased with this. Now let's get our filling in here. Just going to pour just enough because we don't want it soaking through the pastry before it has a chance to cook. But we don't want our pie dry either. No, I think that's going to take it all. It did too. And I'm just going to dip my finger in, I just wanted to make sure the top fit, in the broth. And I'm going to wet the edges of the pastry, just like that, just so that I can pinch my crust together on the top. So just like any other pie, we're just going to crimp the crust. Oh, look at that, folks. Look at that. Now let's hope it doesn't fall apart in the oven. So far, so good. My very first, and I keep wanting to say widget, but it's a fidget pie. I'm just going to poke a hole in the center there. Let some of that wonderful juice vent. And I don't want to fidget with this too much. Ha ha ha, maybe that's where the name came from. So let's just get this in the oven at 400 degrees for the first 15 minutes. All right, we'll be back when this comes out of the oven. Now I went to pastry brush some egg wash on my fidget pie, and I noticed it falling apart. So guess what? Once again, rather than have an epic fail, I'm just going to put my parchment back on because and I think it's because I had the too much liquid. So I'm just going to try and squeeze it together with the parchment, and I'm going to do something very early 19th century. I'm just going to put a couple of staples, and the reason I'm not using a paper clip is because the only ones I have are plastic coated, and hopefully that will solve the problem. Live and learn, kiddies. Okay, moment of truth. Oh, so I cheated a wee bit, but we're going to let this sit or set until our squash is done. Not too shabby. There's a little bit of the burn from where the filling poured out of this one side. If you remember, that's the side that collapsed on me. But all in all, I'm quite pleased. We'll see you at the dinner table.
Yeah.
All right, folks, here we are. There's my fidget pie. And let's see how our squash turned out. Oh, it looks lovely. Now, the test, folks. Here it is. And I'm going to say, although I cheated and used parchment, my little pie lifter. Oh my goodness. Whoops. Let's have a taste, shall we? Is that ever different?
It's good.
It's got a savory taste with just a hint of sweet. Well, what do you say, Papa? There you go. And the squash and sweet potato is really good too. Although, even though I grated it, the sweet potato is slightly undercooked, just slightly. It's not stopping Papa from filling up on it. This is the Mrs. Wolfie from our half-acre homestead saying, fidget pie. Just another nice hot fall meal. Bye. Bye-bye.